Hi everyone, I'm Sydney. I'm an experience design lead at Magic Leap, and for the past few years, I've been specializing in creating collaboration tools for XR. So my background is in physical design, but I've been a spatial experience designer for over a decade now, considering the relationship between the digital and physical spaces that we inhabit.
And I'm Jacqueline. I'm a lead behavioral scientist in the product research team at Magic Leap. My background sort of sits at the intersection of psychology and cognitive neuroscience, in which I got my PhD, but also in human factors and behavioral science. So I'll be presenting a lot of the research background behind some of the collaboration principles we'll be introducing today.
Okay, so collaboration is essential to success. I know most of you have spent this week exploring the Expo Center, and all of that new technology and innovative products, it's only possible because of collaboration. So this is why it's so important for us to consider how to create successful collaboration tools for XR. So as we've moved further and further away from most of our communications happening face-to-face, there's a common sense of trepidation that technology can further isolate us. And honestly, it's surprisingly easy to turn inward with technology, ends up heads down in our own devices, where our screens become barriers, disconnecting us from the physical space and causing us to feel alone, even when we're together.
So consider what is often referred to as the loneliness epidemic in North America. I think something like almost 50% of North Americans are saying they feel like they don't really have any meaningful personal connections. And that has often been linked to increased use of technology. But even if we look sort of outside the personal interactions and towards more professional ones, sometimes technology can make sort of reading the room more difficult, just from a purely practical perspective. So when compared to face-to-face interaction, when we think about 2D communications, they've sort of broken down a lot of stuff that we get in face-to-face. So we miss a lot of important cues, just to name a few, like ability to notice peripheral cues or hold shared attention on one object in the room, point to objects in a room, or use, for example, gaze in turn-taking. So whose turn it is to speak is largely influenced by where we're looking at the time. So all these sort of great things that you miss when you're communicating in 2D has led to some of this feeling of breakdown in collaboration and communication. So with that, I kind of want to introduce a bold proposition. What if, with new technology, we kind of have the opportunity to do the opposite, to sort of bring us back together, back to that original state of taking advantage of our strengths as bonders, sharers, communicators. But we have to really think about designing very intentionally to make this happen. And we believe that AR gives us this great opportunity to bring us back together. But we have to kind of really think about how to design both technology and experiences in a way that takes advantage of all these natural strengths, all the great stuff that comes from face-to-face communication, and bring it into AR very intentionally. So we do believe that AR has this opportunity to take advantage of our natural strengths, but also give us additionally those technological superpowers. So I just want to take a moment before we dive into our collaboration principles to just sort of lay the foundation for them. So when you think about how we interact in the real world, a lot of that is actually translated into how we interact in XR. So I'll just give one example of that. When you think about, in the real world, this concept of social inhibition. So when people are doing a challenging task, let's say they're solving like a math problem, then they get flustered when they have other people watching them. So it's hard to do these challenging tasks in the presence of others. Not so much simple tasks, so we do just fine with that. The same thing happens in AR. So when we have an avatar watching us, we get flustered kind of in the exact same way. So with that, sort of that just as one example in mind, but there's so many others of this sort of translation. Our goal should be to sort of rebuild the baseline aspects of collaboration so it feels really natural. Some things that we take for granted in the real world, and build those in really intentionally into AR experiences. So that leads me to introduce our 4 design considerations for collaborating in XR: configuration, communication, shared experience, and flexibility. So these are sort of inspired by both social psychology principles from the real world, but also a lot of our own research and dog fooding, user research, countless iterations on our very own collaborative apps. So with that, I want to hand it over to Cindy to introduce the workshop, as she's one of the amazing team of designers who have created this app, many of which are also in the room with us today.
So Magic Leap Workshop is a spatial collaboration tool. Its purpose is to bring people together to co-create, iterate, problem solve, and prototype. It empowers teams located together to have a shared see what I see experience, while also giving hybrid and remote teams the ability to work together as if they're in the same room. So every feature in Workshop has been intentionally designed for collaboration and to encourage active participation. And so through our own daily use of Workshop and through our partnership with Hush, we began to unearth what would be possible with this type of spatial collaboration tool. So our partner Hush is a technology-forward design studio. They create architecturally integrated interactive experiences for a variety of clients and industries, including HBO, Instagram, and Okta. They're a multidisciplinary team with architects, engineers, technologists, and they're only able to succeed when everyone can effectively come together to co-create. They're also pioneers. They're often dreaming up bespoke experiences that no one has ever built before. And so traditionally with their partners, one of their pain points is trying to get them to believe in the design and understand how the design will feel before it is ever built. And so seeing is believing for them. And Workshop gives them the ability to see everything together at real scale and in the real world.
Now with Magic Leap, we can go from concept to visualization and actually make design decisions early in the project.
Magic Leap Workshop has been really useful to create physical spaces and designs within those spaces. Workshops empowered us to have conversations kind of across disciplines.
I would describe this as a collaborative digital whiteboarding tool, but in augmented reality.
It's like having this kind of virtual crafting session.
Prototyping is really important to our process. We're often designing things that either we haven't designed or built before, or that no one has built before. And so I think we're able to kind of push our designs further because we can see what they'll feel like before it's even built, and we don't need to like tamper things down because we're unsure of what the final outcome will be.
Seeing it at scale, you get this sense of awe and this sense of wonder, where you're like, oh, that's how big it is.
It was that wow factor. I know when I put them on, the first thing you probably saw was a smile.
Okay, so we thought letting you see it for a moment would help make the connection here. So let's really get into these considerations now, starting with configuration. So both in the real world and in XR, the way that we arrange ourselves in space affects our ability to be able to effectively collaborate. Oh, yeah, thank you. Since the harnessing of fire, people have been circling up, not just to huddle for warmth or cook their meals, but to tell stories, to share, to make plans, to strategize. And we all know that the tales of the Knights of the Round Table, and this table being round was a symbolic indication of the equality of its members. Everyone, regardless of rank, holds an equal seat. So to invite and encourage collaboration, equality is important. And even if you don't use a literal round table in your XR session, how participants are arranged affects the perception of equality and therefore impacts the likelihood of collaboration. Okay, so in lecture auditoriums like this one, you have a stage with a presenter, and then everyone else in the audience is lined up in rows facing in a single direction. This creates a hierarchy where everyone else is in a secondary passive listening role. And while this is great for presenting, it doesn't work for collaborative tasks. As much as I would like to be collaborating with like every mind in this room right now. research shows that if your goal is to create interaction, the best arrangement is a circle or a U shape. Okay, so let's take it all the way back to kindergarten for a moment. If you take individual children and you put them at their own desks, give them their own sheet of paper and their own box of crowns, they're going to create separate ideas. And while those ideas might be good, they're still individual. But if you take everyone and put them together at a large table with a central sheet of paper, they're going to work together to create something. And so the same thing applies in XR. Having a central point to collaborate around helps to focus the group on a common task. In our own research, we found that without this central grounding element, it can be really easy for participants to wander off, lose their focus, or get distracted being heads down in their own menus. And doing this generally leads everyone to doing their own thing, even when they're in a shared session together. So in workshop, we responded by creating a central canvas to focus the group's attention.
So Sydney talked a little bit about sort of the orientation of people around virtual content, but just a word about orientation of people relative to one another. Specifically, I'm talking about how people are oriented in space when they join a session remotely as avatars. So it's important to sort of think about this intentionally to make sure that you're maintaining session flow and avoiding sort of a sense of discomfort. So we've learned the hard way that a lot of consideration to this is important in situations when, let's say, your colleague is spawned as an avatar behind you outside your field of view that interrupts the session flow. Or even maybe worse, someone spawns right on top of you. That can be super awkward. So in response, in workshop, we made sure that we're dispersing participants intentionally around the canvas, facing each other, and with a comfortable distance between them. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit, bring this back into how things happen in the real world. When you think about personal space, also sometimes referred to as proxemics, you have these sort of 4 buckets of personal space. So from intimate, personal, social to public. Intimate is something like from your body to about 1.5 feet. You keep it just with your closest friends, romantic partners, family members, and then all the way to public space. That's a much larger distance, like about 10 feet. Construction of shopping malls, sidewalks, airports, all that is kind of constructed with that in mind. And these are things that sometimes we might not kind of intuitively realize, but are really baked into the way that we interact with people. And there's actually a lot of, again, translation from the real world into XR. People behave in a similar way when it comes to how much social distance they want to keep from each other in physical space or from each other's avatars. This also varies very largely by culture. These are kind of just general buckets, and I think sort of more tuned to North America. But when you think about cultural differences, there's also huge cultural differences. A famous study done in I think it was the 60s or the 70s, a researcher looked at people in a coffee shop for 1 hour, and he found that in Latin America, they kind of got so close such that they touched 180 times in that just scope of 1 hour, versus in North America or UK, it was 0. So huge differences, as you can imagine. And so we kind of want to really think about not just sort of these general proxemics, but also how that varies by culture, and trying to think about how we can consider building that into XR. Let's say in one culture it would be very awkward to spawn close to each other, and in another you might need it to actually establish a social bond. Okay, so diving into communication, it kind of flows nicely because the configuration was how we're oriented in space, facing each other around a canvas. That's sort of optimal for collaboration. And if we're around a canvas, we're also face-to-face. So face-to-face interaction is super important because a huge part of the way we communicate actually happens non-verbally. Oftentimes, we kind of don't even realize these things. Only about 7% is verbal. And obviously, this kind of varies, but this is sort of a general statistic. And so when there's a discrepancy between what you hear verbally and non-verbally, people usually actually take that non-verbal message as being the message that they're sort of interpreting. And so if Sydney asked me hey, how are you, Jacqueline? And I'm I'm fine. Obviously, she's going to interpret me as mad, not fine. That's just a very kind of obvious example, but then much more subtle things that we don't even realize. I kind of referred to gaze a little bit earlier. So gaze is important in turn taking. So when we're speaking to each other and I'm averting my gaze, that's actually a cue that I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. And then when I look back up, the conversation turns. So I'm kind of ready to give over my turn when I look back up. So all these kind of subtle things that we want to think about being able to retain. So I think a lot of this kind of great nonverbal stuff gets missed in 2D communication. And with AR, we have the opportunity to pick up on these rich nonverbal cues and other information that you miss with other technology. And I'll just give sort of some more specific examples of this. So with AR, you're enabling, number one, peripheral cues. So peripheral cues, what I mean by that is just your ability to use peripheral vision to interpret, let's say, subtle body language. Because when you're talking to somebody, just let's say on a computer screen, they're pretty small in your visual field of view. And if you're looking a little bit away, let's say you're writing notes, you're not going to notice subtle changes. But when people are in full scale in 3D, you're going to notice those changes just as you do sort of in the real world. And then, sorry, just going back. I kind of lunged towards the podium there. But shared attention on real-world objects and pointing, something that obviously you can have. Turn-taking cues that I alluded to, or holding multiple parallel conversations at the same time. And then this one probably most importantly, because it kind of brings it all together, is all these cues happen, all these spatial cues you're getting without distortion or delay. So that kind of brings us to the next slide. So just your sort of mixed reality spectrum here, from VR to video see-through technology to AR in a spectrum of immersion into the real world. So with optical see-through AR, you have direct, clear access into visibility of your real world. And so you see objects, equipments, surroundings, but most importantly to this presentation, people around you without any distortion or delay. And so while each of these technologies really have their place, when both mobility, but more importantly here, real-world sort of environmental awareness is important, I can't underscore enough the value of AR for the feelings of connectedness and co-presence.
Okay, so enhanced communication is not just reserved for those of us who are able to use AR together in person. Magic Leap's avatars make the same level of communication and co-presence possible for remote and hybrid teams. So using advanced eye tracking, gaze, expression, lip sync, hand tracking, and hand gestures, this combination of things makes the points that Jacqueline just covered also possible when we are distributed around the world. Okay, so shared experience. This one might seem like common sense, but ensuring a common reality for participants is critical in a collaborative session. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're constantly wondering or asking out loud, are you seeing what I'm seeing? I'm looking at this blue cube over here in the corner. Can you see that? Some apps that we've used actually allow people who are in the same session to be in different scenes at the same time or view their own disconnected, asynchronous versions of the same scenes, breaking that see what I see paradigm. But if you were in a collaborative session together, you should be in the same scene, seeing the same content together in synchronization. So for example, if I point to something, you should be able to see that I'm pointing to it, and we should both be seeing it at the same time. And research supports this. Creating this type of parallel experience for all users increases task efficiency, feelings of connectedness, and co-presence. And a shared common reality also unlocks this ability to see and experience digital content together at scale. So for in-person on-site visits, this is a real game changer. It enabled our partners Hush to have a lot of aha moments with their clients. They said it helped their clients believe in what they were designing, and that they were being able to walk them through it together at scale made it all sort of finally click. So this type of synchronized spatial experience gave everyone the confidence needed to make integral decisions to move forward with construction.
And then a quick word about when we have this sort of shared experience and there's multiple people interacting in a session and some often manipulating or having the same ability to edit content at the same time, how can we avoid sort of a certain level of chaos? Well, to take inspiration from some 2D apps, Miro, Sparkboards, Figma, you have to identify participants and their actions in real time. But let's consider like how and where we can do this in AR, because obviously things are a little different. Well, we should think about where people are looking when they're interacting with 3D content. They're typically looking like towards that 3D content that they're interacting with, and only occasionally do they like glance up at their collaborators, whether that be their in-person or remote avatar collaborators. And so we want to think about identifying both actions and participants near that like action zone, the area that people are looking, that might be near the controller, Ray, or it could be near the heads if you're interacting directly.
Great, okay. So our final consideration today is flexibility. And so we feel like this is really important. Obviously, we've discussed how integral communication is to collaboration. And so your UI should never be a barrier to that communication. It should never hinder a face-to-face conversation. So if I'm discussing something with Jacqueline or Avatar Jacqueline, and I need to quickly access a tool, I do not want my menu to become a hindrance to that. I don't want it to break down our conversation or be a disruptor. So be considerate of where you are placing your UI, and also be considerate of like the form factor of your UI, so that it's a UI, so that it's not something that's just creating a huge like pillar between you and your colleagues. Also consider giving people the flexibility to adjust its position as needed. So that might be something as simple as like having it follow you around, or being able to pull it and pin it in place off to the side so that you can remain focused on the central canvas and on your partners in that moment. And so when we give people the ability to just kind of quickly access tools, it helps them stay engaged with the group. Because when everyone goes heads down into their own menu, it really starts to disrupt the flow that everyone has together. Okay, so collaboration doesn't always happen around a table, as we know. So sometimes breaking out of the conference room is necessary. So baking in enough flexibility to your system and to your tools to allow people to experiment not only with the scale at which they're designing and collaborating, but also with the location and the environment. So also consider being able to use the same tools in all stages of design for your project. So when you bake in the flexibility, you really have, it really becomes possible for you to start with early ideas and sketches in the same tool and use that tool throughout your entire process up into a full-scale situation. And that helps shift it into a lasting tool and really drives adoption. Okay, so I just wanted to take one more moment to iterate here on how integral using a flexible spatial collaboration tool has been for our team. So we've been using Workshop on a daily basis for over a year now to meet, ideate, iterate, prototype, and we most recently used it to design part of our booth and a demo called XR Tour that you can see here today. So our team that was working on this demo is fully remote, and this demo is all about the relationship between you and your physical world. So for us, moving through the space of the digital booth together at scale was essential to being able to make design decisions. So the simple power of being able to point to things and make adjustments in real time was really critical. And previously, this type of spatial collaboration was only possible in person.
So with that, just sort of as a wrap up, the design considerations that we introduced today are just a really critical starting point to starting to infuse collaboration into XR experiences and thinking about how to do that. We really need to, if the intention of the app is a collaborative app, we should be intentional about designing for that collaboration. So applying social psych principles into, and from real world interactions, how they work well into XR. And I think if we do that, AR really has the power to sort of bring us back together. And so we believe that optical see-through AR done right has the opportunity to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm good.